Okay, let's dive right into this explainer on the critical mechanics of safely wiring a light switch. Whether you're just looking to update the look of your room or you've got a fixture that's acting up, swapping out a switch is actually one of the most approachable home projects you can tackle. But, and this is a big but, underneath that simple plastic faceplate, it's kind of a maze of potential hazards. So today, we're going to explore the exact physical techniques you need to wire a switch properly. And more importantly, we're going to highlight the really frequent errors that DIYers make, the kind of stuff that can lead to flickering lights or literally dangerous electrical arcing. Let's get started. So why does your switch sound like gravel? Think about the light switches in your house right now. Have you ever flipped one and felt this strange crunchiness? Or heard a grinding sound inside the wall? Well, that isn't just a minor annoyance. That is a massive physical warning sign. It literally means the internal mechanics of your switch are failing. The components that are meant to snap together securely to let the electricity flow, they're wearing out. If we ignore that sound, we are straight up ignoring a fire hazard.
Here's a quick roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover 1. Signs it is time to replace. 2. Safety prep and testing. 3. Stripping and J-hook mistakes. 4. The big backstabbing versus sidewiring debate. 5. Overcrowded terminals and neutrals. And finally 6. The commercial-grade upgrade. By the end, you'll know exactly how to avoid those hidden dangers.
All right, Section 1. Signs it is time. Recognizing when a switch has finally given up the ghost is your very first line of defense. Obviously, if you turn on the switch and the light absolutely refuses to turn on, you've got a problem. Now, your first step should always be to just replace the bulb, right? But if that doesn't fix it, the switch itself is likely the culprit. Look out for these other symptoms too. Maybe this switch flips down loosely or it kind of toggles loosely from side to side. That just means the internal springs are completely shot. We already mentioned that grinding gravel sound. But listen, the most alarming sign by far is if you see visible sparks pop out when you flip that toggle. If you see sparks, no way, do not wait. It is absolutely time to replace that switch immediately. Moving on to Section 2, Safety Prep and Testing. Now, what's really interesting here is how simple but completely non-negotiable this safety sequence is before you ever touch a wire. We never, ever work on live electricity, period. Step 1 is heading down to your breaker box and turning off the power to the room. But, hey, how do you know it's really off? This is exactly where a non-contact voltage pen comes in. And here is the crucial point that a ton of DIYers skip, you must test that pen on a known hot source first. So, go to an outlet that you know for a fact is working, stick the pen near it, and make sure it lights up and beeps. Only after confirming your tool is actually working should you bring it over to the light switch box to confirm there is zero power flowing.
As one of the experts we source brilliantly put it, and I love this quote, "You mess up one time, you'll know the answer, you'll never forget it when you grab that and it's hot." It's a little bit of dark humor, sure, but it is incredibly true. The shock of grabbing a live 120-volt wire is absolutely not a lesson you want to learn the hard way. Always hit the breaker and always double-check with your tester. No exceptions.
Okay, once the power is confirmed totally off, it's time to open up the box. And I've got a great pro tip here to save your walls. Always, always score the seam between the wall and the faceplate with a razor blade. Over the years, people paint right over the edges of these plates. If you just yank the plate off, you are going to tear the drywall paper and create a really annoying patching job for yourself. And one more thing, when you're removing or installing those tiny faceplate screws, put the power drill away. Seriously, just use a manual hand screwdriver. Those old plastic faceplates get incredibly brittle, and a power drill will snap the head right off those screws in a fraction of a second.
All right, Section 3. Stripping and J-hook mistakes. This is where the actual physical mechanics of a proper connection really come into play.
You see, stripping the wire is kind of a Goldilocks situation. It has to be just right, usually right around 3/4 of an inch. If you strip too much wire off, you end up with bare, live copper sticking out the back of the switch. And if a ground wire brushes up against that exposed copper, bam, you'll trip a breaker, or worse, cause severe arcing. On the flip side, if you strip too little wire, the terminal screw is going to end up clamping down on the plastic insulation instead of the actual copper. That leads to a terrible connection, flickering lights, and intermittent power. What you want is for the bare wire to fit perfectly under the screw with no extra hanging out. Just right.
So once your wire is stripped, you need to form a J-hook, but the direction of that hook is literally the most common mistake DIYers make. You have to loop the wire around the screw in a clockwise direction. Why? Well, because righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. When you tighten the screw clockwise, it physically pulls the copper wire tighter underneath the screw head. If you wrap it counterclockwise, tightening the screw will literally push the wire out and away from the terminal. It's a small detail, but it's a real game changer. Now, the whole reason we're so obsessed with tightening these screws properly is to avoid a loose connection. In electrical work, loose wires create excess heat. As the electricity struggles to jump across a poor connection, it physically heats up the metal. Over time, that heat melts plastic, destroys the switch, and can easily start a fire right behind your walls. Proper mechanical connections aren't just about making the light turn on, guys. They are absolutely crucial for keeping your house safe.
Section 4. Backstabbing V's, Side Wiring. Choosing your connection method. And this brings us to a really highly debated topic among electricians. If you look on the back of most residential switches, you'll see these small holes where you can simply push the straight wire right in. This is called backstabbing or speed wiring. Now, to be fair, backstabbing is completely legal by the National Electrical Code, and it's incredibly fast, which is exactly why some contractors use it. However, it relies on this tiny little internal spring tab to bite into the wire and hold it in place. Over years of use, heating, and cooling, those internal tabs can loosen up, which leads to flickering lights and arcing. Side wiring, on the other hand, taking the time to make that clockwise J-hook and clamping it down under the side screw, yeah, it takes longer, but it provides an incredibly secure, highly visible, and fail-safe connection. Honestly, taking that extra 30 seconds, it's well worth the peace of mind. Section 5. Overcrowded terminals and neutrals. Let's look at what happens when you open up a box that has 2, 3, or even 4 switches crammed inside.
A massive mistake DIYers make when trying to share power between multiple switches is stacking 2 hot wires underneath a single terminal screw. Never do this. Seriously, those screws are engineered to hold exactly 1 wire securely. If you stack 2 on top of each other, any tiny movement in the box is going to cause them to shift, slip, and eventually arc. Instead, you absolutely must use what's called a pigtail. This is where you tie the main power wire together with a couple of short jumper wires using a wire nut, and then you just send 1 dedicated jumper wire to each individual switch. It keeps everything clean and perfectly safe.
And while we're poking around inside that crowded box, let's quickly clarify the color coding, because the white wires tend to confuse a lot of beginners. So black wires are your hot wires. They carry the power. The green screw in the switch, that's for your bare copper ground wire. But the white wires, those are your neutrals. A really huge misunderstanding is when DIYers try to attach that white neutral wire to a standard single-pole switch. Actually, scratch that. You never do this. A standard switch simply interrupts the black hot wire. The white neutral wires just tie together in the back of the box with a wire nut to complete the circuit back to your electrical panel. They bypass the switch entirely, the whole shebang.
All right, Section 6, the commercial grade upgrade. Let's see how all of this builds into an actionable upgrade path for your home. When you walk down the aisle at the hardware store, you're going to see standard residential grade switches for just a couple of bucks, and then commercial grade switches for slightly more. The difference between them is massive. Residential switches basically force you to either use those controversial backstabbing push tabs we talked about or manually create your J-hooks. But commercial grade switches, they feature internal compression plates. They are significantly more durable and just have a way stronger build quality overall. For a tiny bit more money, it's a huge step up. But here is the absolute greatest feature of the commercial upgrade: true back wiring. Now please do not confuse this with backstabbing. They are completely different animals. With commercial back wiring, you strip the wire straight, slide it into the back of the switch, and then you tighten the terminal screw. But instead of a flimsy little spring tab holding it, tightening that screw actually clamps down a heavy-duty metal vise plate inside the switch, physically crushing the straight wire into a perfectly secure hold. You get the speed of backstabbing with a connection that is arguably even stronger than a J-hook. It is absolutely for sure worth the extra few dollars. Now, to make sure you get these connections perfectly tight, regardless of which switch you buy, you really need the right tools. Skip the standard Phillips head screwdriver that just slips and strips out the screws. The terminal screws on these switches are actually designed for specialized bits. So grab a No. 1 Robertson, which is a square bit, or better yet, a combination bit like the Milwaukee ECX that perfectly fills the screw head. Pair that with a really comfortable, ergonomic ratcheting hand screwdriver. Remember, we're looking for a gentle, precise touch to get it perfectly snug, not the overwhelming brute force of a power drill.
So, we've covered the warning signs of a failing switch, the absolute non-negotiable necessity of safety testing, the exact mechanics of a perfect J-hook, the real risks of backstabbing, and how to upgrade your hardware for a much safer home. You now have the focused knowledge to avoid the hidden traps that catch most DIYers. So, I'm going to leave you with this thought. What kind of connections are hiding behind the walls in your house right now? Are they securely sidewired, or are they silently relying on decades-old push tabs? It might just be time to grab your voltage tester and find out. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and stay safe out there.